I gotta just show you this mountain that I climbed up just now. I mean, you can see the deer path I'm walking on is very, very scarce. Pretty steep. I don't know if you can tell on here, but I found a road to get onto. I've been hiking and fishing, caught a few bass this morning, enjoying nature. It's really springy up in here. A lot of cold water springs coming in to this creek. It's very nice. Anyway, pretty steep country up here. Makes you wonder about how those early people that were coming out here would be able to do it with, you know, like moccasins on or something, barefoot maybe. But of course we know there were civilizations here before European people made it to north central West Virginia. Look how steep we are. If I slip, I'm tumbling. And my sandals are super wet. They're just slippy. Beautiful up here. It's so steep, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm not lost. I just don't know where I'm at. I just keep that creek in earshot. Keep the sun direction. Pretty much know how to get back to where I came from. I just never been to this place in particular. It's so cool. It's so steep. This whole side of this creek from where I began to up here, we're, I don't know, a couple miles up in now at this point, and it just keeps going. It's just a sheer rock face in most of it, and it finally turned into somewhat of a steep hill, so I decided to take it out, get out of here. But yeah, I'll catch up with you back on top of the hill. I'm going to try to edit this all into one video. We'll see what happens. I'm pretty far up on top of this hill now, and behind me you see what is a small kind of rock shelter forming. You see this layer up top is it's like a sandstone. It's pretty hard. It's like a not so gritty sandstone, but it's a sandstone. And there's some shales probably up underneath of this is what I'm seeing. When it breaks up, it starts looking like that, really fractured. But that's what makes clay, basically, is this shale. But that's not why I'm showing this. Why I'm showing this is early settlers and people that were living in, at least in my region, and I'm starting to learn that it's similar all over the country. But in this county, Marion, there's a history written by a character, Glenn Lowe. It's an early history book of the county, probably written in the 1910 era, sometime around then, I'm not sure. But he recalls a story about 8-foot tall people being found in the county as like mummies and skeletons. And I was doing some reading further on the topic and found another reference or record of a local kind of amateur archaeologist who came across a sealed up. Now this is a small one, like I said, this is not big enough to do anything with, but there are bigger ones through the hills here, all over. I found some, you know, in the past, but where I'm at now, that I haven't found any big ones yet. But I found these early accounts, 1890s, I believe, is when these people were, you know, doing some archaeology around here, this area of West Virginia. And they found inside of a sealed up rock shelter, which was sealed up with stacked stones, another 8-foot tall or so mummified type human person, man or woman or whatever, some type of giant type bone structure, mummified, bundled up, sitting kind of like how I am right now, you know, maybe tightened up around the, it describes it in information that I was reading at the time. I'd have to dig into that and find the accounts, but you can look this stuff up and find old newspaper accounts and stuff like that. So guess what happened when these people in this local area were finding these big skeletal remains of people, and apparently they've been found inside of mounds and stuff too. And we have at least 8 that I know about in this county. One of them's actually kind of close to here. I haven't found it yet, but I've seen it on a map. One day I'm going to go explore up there. But anyway, so people, amateur archaeologists or local people, were finding remains of people in caves like this, in mounds, in other. Some got washed up in a creek. It's actually a creek that runs parallel to this one that I'm on right now. It's over a few miles over this hill behind me, actually. But they washed up out of this creek. So they call in the local university, just like always. Local university, they got some real smart dude there who's been studying, you know, probably at that point, I'm sure he was studying evolution and things of that nature. You know, 1890s, early 1900s, when they were finding these mummies. And so, actually, I think there was an older record than that. But regardless, look into the thing, and then you'll see once the universities come in and find these archaeological sites, whether it be rune stones or stones, you know, carvings or caves or, you know, something, you know, some type of archaeological find, people are always calling in these universities these special white coats that they believe know more than we can know about this stuff. And then what ends up happening is they get on to the Smithsonian. The Smithsonian will get called in. It goes up the chain of command of how things operate. It's a top-down system, and you know the top is always out there scanning the bottom to pull in stuff like that, pull in talented people. That's what the whole system's about. Schools and everything is set up. And guess what happened to all those mummies and stuff? They end up disappeared inside the Smithsonian. You can look into this. I can put links below. Just if you're interested in this, ask a question in the comments. I got no trouble like doing a little bit more footwork research and spoon feeding some people that are just not gonna. If you're not gonna consider this or whatever I'm saying, then you come to the wrong place anyway. So I will get back on this trail and catch you shortly. Just in case you don't know what fun looks like, my face is probably covered in spider webs, and I've been bushwhacking for quite a while, uphill. But if you don't know what fun is, get out and do this. Peace. So I found the trail. Check it out. They've been up here with a bulldozer cleaning it out. I guess they've been testing for gas with small drill sites. I don't know. Hope it doesn't mess with the well, the spring. See, this water's warm. It's not spring fed. But anyway, today is July 3rd. I feel it would be proper to discuss a little bit of American history. This time of year always has a, like a special frequency to the American people. I like walking barefoot. I don't care what, there's no glass up here, whatever. Should be all right. It's good for you. It's really slippery. If I have those sandals on, I can hardly stand even. But July 3rd was the day, the final day of the Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg was a Civil War battle, an American Civil War battle. So let's start talking a little bit about the Civil War. July 3rd was the day that the Army of Northern Virginia was basically wiped pretty bad at Gettysburg. They retreated on July 4th. And the Army of Northern Virginia was the Confederate army, one of the Confederate armies, with several corps. So a corps is a detachment of a army. The Confederacy had, I'm just going to give a lot of background information, because I've known this stuff for a long time, and it occurs to me a lot of people are not as familiar with this history. So I'm going to share some of this stuff. The Army of Northern Virginia was the largest Confederate army, and it was under the command of Robert E. Lee. He decided to lead the Army of Northern Virginia up into Pennsylvania, Maryland, and then Pennsylvania from Virginia. I might have to pause it with these dirt bikes coming. Wow, they were actually like not very nice. They had spun up their tires and yeah, whatever. Anyway, I even like waved and gave him a little peace, like, hey, peace, man. Whatever. Anyway, July 3rd, 1863, that would have been however many years ago. I'm not going to do the math right now. Of course, July 4th being the American so-called Independence Day, the day that the Declaration of Independence was signed by all the various colonies at the time, or the leaders of the so-called colonies at the time, which are basically companies, corporations. Yeah, July 1863, Lee led the Army of Northern Virginia up into Pennsylvania, which was, it is still considered a huge blunder. It was kind of an aimless venture, almost like Napoleon going into Moscow and losing a huge number of his men basically to the winter. Look into that. You can look into any of this stuff, and if you're really interested, hey, I hope you find some resources or something you can further study this stuff. It's just, there's so many books and stuff out there that tell you this stuff. It's just, you know, of course they make history really boring for people to want to know, and any kind of learning is just meant to be very mundane, very unimportant, very unattached to the bigger picture of life and what we're doing and what we are and why we're here. Anyway, we're going to keep talking about Gettysburg and the Battle of Gettysburg and the Civil War and some American history. So Lee went outside of his homeland, which was Virginia. That was the kind of the plan of the war from the beginning for a lot of the generalship. Lee was not the first commander of the Army of Northern Virginia. There was no Army of Northern Virginia until I believe 1862. Lee in 1861, at the outbreak of the war, he was actually over here in so-called West Virginia, which was not a state yet. It becomes a state in 1863 during the Civil War. And Virginia is allegedly named for the Queen Elizabeth and her alleged virginity, which it's probably not true. It's possible she was the mother of Francis Bacon, which we can get into that, and people study that. I'm not saying one way or the other. I'm just saying it's a possibility. And that Bacon and James were brothers, and Jamestown is in Virginia, of course, named after James. It's all connected, guys. It's a big story of history and symbolism, and the symbolism is in the story, and it's on your maps, and it's in pictures. It's in museums, and you've got to follow the symbolism to understand what's going on. So I'm going to keep telling these stories about history, and I'm going to try to talk about some of the symbolism. And I'm just walking through the woods. I don't have a computer or anything. I got this smartphone, but it doesn't have cell service. I'll dump this when I get to the internet and try to figure out how to put it all together coherently. I'm trying to figure all this stuff out. But anyway, back in 1863, Lee led the Army of Northern Virginia through and basically broke the plan. And like I said, in the beginning of the war, he was actually a colonel. He was actually the chief head commandant, or whatever they want to call, of West Point at the time. which is the United States Military Academy. Okay, that's where all the generals and everybody, Lee himself, was trained at. Okay, so at the outbreak of the war in 1861, that's where Lee was at. And it's said that first, I guess, Lincoln asked Lee to command the United States armies, and he declined and said that he would instead stick with his home state of Virginia. And Lee has basically achieved godship in a lot of parts of America, really. And I'm not saying one way or the other about these men. I'm just kind of laying out some story and putting some information out there for you to gnaw on. And so Lee was the commandant there at West Point. And I'm going to bring another general into the picture at the moment, since we're talking about the United States military academies. And that individual is from this area nearby. His name was Thomas Jonathan Jackson, otherwise known as Stonewall Jackson. And you've probably heard of him. He actually was born around the Clarksburg, West Virginia area. Grew up at a place called Jackson's Mill. He was basically adopted or taken care of by his like aunts and uncles and grandparents. He had a rough childhood or whatever, but somehow he ended up in the United States Military Academy, or I can't remember if he went there, or Virginia Military Institute, VMI, which either way, he ended up being a professor of, I believe, artillery at Virginia Military Institute. So these places, what are they? Well, they are where people learn about the arts of warfare. There were many of them established early on in the United States. Virginia Military Institute is one of the old ones. There's, of course, United States Military Academy or whatever. That's like West Point. That's like the chief one. That's like the most prestigious one. There's a bunch more, and you can look into it. And they were set up, in, I believe, 1802 or so. Thomas Jefferson set these up for officers to learn military sciences and civil engineering, basically. How to build bridges and dams and stuff like that. So it seems like they were kind of for the common good, as much like what they say about the Roman Republic era. Here's the spring, it's down in there. So they say the early Roman Republic was kind of like that. You know, those armies were out there building roads and stuff. Of course, they were probably conquering people as well or whatever, but I believe what is going on through history is there's kind of good and bad in everyone and everything. And these groups form, people, you know, they end up identifying with what it is they're serving more than their higher self, and stuff goes down as a result. But I don't know, you know, just consider history, that's all, and what we know of it and what we can read. We weren't there, or maybe we were. Think about it that way. Maybe you were there. Maybe I was there. But back to the 1860s and Thomas Jonathan Jackson. He became known as Stonewall Jackson after the Battle of Manassas, which was the first big land battle of the Civil War. It was over pretty close to Washington, D.C., where basically if they would have chased the Federals that day and pursued the retreat, they would have, you know, they would have encountered a lot of defenses around Washington, D.C., which got upgraded throughout the war, so they would have had a much harder time penetrating later in the war. And I believe it was Jackson who just wanted to chase, just follow them. And these guys studied a little book called Napoleon's Maxims of War. Okay, now there's all kinds of little books out there. A lot of them you might have never even heard of. Now, Napoleon's Maxims of War, we can get into that some other time. It's pretty interesting stuff. I believe it was actually kind of like how the Shakespearean works were kind of ghost written. I believe a lot of these books through history were ghost written. I don't think this dude Napoleon wrote it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. I don't know. He was guided along the way, that's no doubt, by people of the orders of various knighted orders, we'll say. There's several of them. One starts with a Society of J Word. One of them is the Knights of the Temple. One of them is Knights of an M word. That sounds like some type of sweetening barley made device. And another one, I don't remember what they're called. It's not that important, but just be aware that these things exist out there. Now, one of these groups goes way back to the Crusades. And in fact, probably all of them do, because they're probably all branches of older entities that existed before that. And there's a little place in Italy that's in the capital city of Italy. That's its own separate city and country. And it's home to the chief of the Small Hats. And he wears a zucca. It looks like the little butt end of a zucchini. And in Italian or the Latin languages, they call it a zucca. It's like a squash bottom. But they got all kinds of symbolism. The hat's one of them. They got all kinds of flags. A lot of them have this special cross on it. And it looks like this. It's a special cross that they use to identify themselves. And you got to pay attention to the symbolism. It's in paintings. The symbolism is in etchings and drawings. It's in statues. Look at where the battlefield at Gettysburg is. It's like the biggest statuary in the country besides Washington, D.C. I mean, if you've ever been there, and I've gone there many times, I've been there many a time, the statues are immense and they're really marvelous and amazing, and they're made of all kinds of various special stones. But there's a lot of symbolism in that these special so-called think they're, maybe people who think they're special, I'm not sure, these secret orders and so on. And they're telling the story through the symbolism for those who are initiated and know how to read the symbolism. And I do not. I'm not telling you I do or don't. Maybe I do. I don't know. I'm making attempts, we'll say, learning. And that's what we're supposed to do, learn. And if you have more information on this stuff, I would love to hear it. Anything I ever say, please give me more information, counter what I'm saying. Tell me I'm a stupid idiot. That's cool. I'll just go fishing and stuff again. I don't care. I'll keep studying, keep learning. So we'll go back to the Civil War again after we just discussed some symbolism again. Manassas. That's where Jackson earned the nickname Stonewall. Another Confederate general saw him and his brigade holding a line. And can't remember who it was, but one of the other officers points over to Jackson's brigade and says, there's Jackson standing like a stone wall. And they were just defeating the U.S. infantry at that time. And you'll see throughout the war things start to really develop. Immigration up in the northern part of the country, they were just throwing immigrants out there. They were just getting people to come give their so-called citizenship, get their citizenship, and drafting them in the army. A bunch of Irishmen and Germans, a bunch of Italians under a dude called Garibaldi. You'll hear more about him later. He came over here during the Civil War and was associated with Lincoln somehow. who I believe was in possible that Lincoln was in the Order of the Rosy Cross. I'm not sure. I don't know. These are just things I've heard, I've looked into. They seem to make sense. It seems to be some type of big drama going on. Sorry, I gotta adjust my fishing rod. It fell. And it's basically a big drama going out of two groups, probably many more, but they're all like one group. I'm not sure how it goes. If you know, hey, let me know. It's cool. But they say Lincoln was in one of these secret orders. And of course we know that the FMs were on both sides, all over the generalship and in the enlisted ranks. I mean, basically the orders work in a very similar way to the way the military structure works, because it's related to the Society of the Jays, Yesui. So they set up a structure that is the same type of structure as secret societies. And basically the entire society is set up in the same kind of structure of a hierarchy. And there's generals at the top and the president and stuff in the war room and all them dudes. And down at the bottom is just some dudes who were basically propagandized through their local church system and schools and newspapers into hating each other enough to go out and start killing each other. And it didn't benefit them any. By the end of the war, a lot of them were just very, very, very damaged in lots of ways. And we'll talk about that. But back to 1861, Manassas. Jackson won the day at Manassas. And throughout the war, Jackson would prove to be a genius tactician. And what did he do? Well, they worked in small detachments, moving. They come together to engage the enemy real quick, bang, bang, and then get out of there. And he was eventually, so it was just like a guerrilla warfare tactic. It was known as the Valley Campaign. I'm gonna stick around here because I'm getting back towards civilization. We'll just mosey around a bit. So Jackson became pretty well known at Manassas. He had a brigade, they were called the Stonewall Brigade. And all through 1862, he was basically doing a guerrilla warfare style defensive war, staying in Virginia and West Virginia, so-called West Virginia, which was not a state yet, it was still Virginia, which was his home territory. And these guys were, like I said, working on Napoleon's maxims of war, and Jackson said to have kept a copy of it with him. And Lee instructed based on it also. I think he kept a copy of it with him as well. And by 1862, Lee was eventually asked to come over and take charge of the new Army of Northern Virginia, which he does. And they're fighting over in the eastern part of Virginia. In the western part of Virginia, they got some stuff going on down in the south, in Tennessee and so on. But we're going to focus on Virginia because I'm more familiar with what happened up around here. So they're organizing these newly created armies that were they're organizing how supply chains work, how to get provisions and things to the soldiers out in the fields, how to get them armed. At the beginning of the war, they were reusing a whole bunch of old and antiquated firearms known as smoothbore, and they were even using flintlocks, which a smoothbore weapon has a very low range. You gotta be real close, and that's why they fought the way they did. They got real close and fought in these lines, which basically Lee is going to continue doing that stuff and following these Napoleonic tactics. And that's the Gettysburg campaign. He actually even violated a few of Napoleon's maxims, but he thought he was maybe, I can't say what he thought, but it's possible that he believed he was going to win on that campaign, but most a lot of historians look and just say it was a total failure. So let me tell you what happened leading up to 1863. All through 1862, the South was basically winning an at-home war, and it was considered to be an invasion. And that's, I mean, right or wrong or whatever. They're putting a bunch of armies into your towns. It's no different than what happened in the colonial times and escalated into the American Revolution. It's really similar. And they kind of saw it like that, the normal, regular, salt of the earth, farming people. And of course, they were propagandized leading up to that. They were, like I said, through their churches, through social groups, and through so-called secret orders, such as the Knights of the Golden Circle, who were kind of rabble rousers. And hey, you guys, you got to understand, these people are out there today in the public, stirring public dissent and opinion. Nothing has changed, okay? So those dudes were called the Knights of the Golden Circle. They were allegedly only operating out in the western areas, if you look into them. But there were secret orders all over these cities, and, you know, passing along dissent, basically. And there were militias forming in some of these areas, like Charleston, West Virginia had, I mean, a lot of big cities all over the country had militias where the groups were getting together and training and getting ready for a war. So who was in charge of all these groups? Who are these guys? Who knows tactics and militia affairs? So anyway, we go into 1862. Jackson's winning all over Virginia based on a stay-at-home war. And we'll fast forward just to 1863 so I can get on with it. 1863, early part of 1863, Jackson, by this point, is in charge of a division, which is a portion of a corps. He may have had a corps under him, I can't remember, but regardless, they were fighting out after like these campaigns in eastern Virginia. There was a series of battles, big battles in 1863 when basically the North was pressing hard in eastern Virginia and sent big, massive armies down to eastern Virginia. And the Confederacy responded by sending big army back. And Lee was engaged with the Northern Army, Army of the Potomac, was known by this point. I don't remember who the generalship was under at this point. Maybe you can tell me. But anyway, they're fighting at Chancellorsville. It was a several-day battle. This is after like lots of battling and lots of very bad fighting, very intense fighting. Jackson made a super brilliant maneuver using some local knowledge he had under his crew of generals, or not generals, but officers and intelligence workers. You got to understand, these secret societies and stuff are the intelligence networks as well. Okay, so Jackson actually had a local map maker from Virginia that had probably a storehouse full of all these maps of these areas that he was fighting in, and he always had maps of where he was at. And they knew of a route where they could flank the Federal Army because it was left exposed, which Napoleon's very first maxim of war is, well, his first maxim is about the terrain itself, that deserts are the most difficult to pass, mountains are the second most difficult, and rivers and so on. And then he goes on to say that when you're moving your armies and you're placing your armies, your flanks must always be guarded by either a neutral territory, a river, or a mountain chain, or a desert or something. You got to protect your flanks by something, forest, fortifications, whatever it may be, cavalry, whatever you got, artillery out there, whatever. But they had a totally undefended flank, which was, I believe, the 11th Corps of the Federal Army. And these guys were made up of a lot of immigrants from the new Northeast, and a lot of them didn't even speak English, and they were basically sitting ducks for Jackson and his corps that came sweeping in. They did a flank march that was, I don't know, like 16 miles or something. They basically came out of nowhere. The federal scouts and front lines did not see them coming. They only saw Jackson's guys when the deer started jumping out of the forest. So imagine that. It was just treacherous, just horrible situation for everybody involved. But Jackson was a brilliant tactician. Take that what you will. And anyway, later that night, he was headed back toward where his encampment was, and was so-called accidentally shot by so-called friendly fire. A so-called regiment out of North Carolina was said to have guard posts out there, and they opened fire on Jackson and his staff as they were riding. And I'm gonna say I have my doubts as to whether that is the truth, that he was accidentally shot at. He was shot, I believe, 3 times, okay? And Jackson is this brilliant tactician who wants to keep the armies at home all the war, and basically fight it out that way by just pushing out the invaders and staying where your family and homes and supplies and everything you're fighting for is. And Jackson died a few days later. He was laid up. They amputated his arm, and he was actually in recovery when he started to have symptoms of what they say is pneumonia. And yeah, it's an interesting story. Other historians have done a lot of work on that, and I didn't come up with any of this stuff on my own. I'm just telling you, it's quite possible that Jackson was shot on purpose and poisoned after they didn't do it the first time, just like they will do. These guys use all sorts of methods to get their point across. And what happened, that was May of 1863. So we've got 2 months before Gettysburg, which Jackson would have adamantly opposed, like Lee's many other generals. A lot of them opposed the action, and especially what happened on the 3rd day of Gettysburg, which is Pickett's charge. And you can look into that history and so on. You'll see it was a just totally stupid move. They marched most of the Army of Northern Virginia across over a mile of open field under heavy artillery fire. The artillery cannonade that happened before the Battle of Gettysburg, it took place for a couple hours in the morning on July 3rd, and it was just a roaring thunder of just nonstop cannon fire from both sides. They lined up in a big open area. They're heavily just reinforced part of their federal line, and they went across a mile or so of open field, the Confederates, under, you know, the guidance or orders of Lee. And, you know, Jackson was actually known for refusing orders that were going to get his men killed. And a lot of people say that wouldn't have happened, basically, if Jackson survived the war. Anyway, I got to get going doing some stuff. I've given a lot of information right there. Look at the symbolism. What was the Confederate battle flag? Is it the same as that cross that I drew on the ground earlier? What is the Army of the Potomac's symbolism? Look into their corps badges and Army of Northern Virginia, all their various badges and things that all these guys were wearing, and flags that they were flying. And look at the symbolism, look at the statues, and look at the symbolism. That's where the story is at. Half of the story or more of it is in the symbols. So anyway, enjoy yourself. Go out there and get in the woods and do something muddy and sweaty, and get out there and enjoy the life. Peace.